Hello and welcome to the next in our Success Tips and Helpful Hints series, this one entitled Quick Tips for Independent Hearing Witnesses. Let's jump on in. So here we're setting up for success. And the first step really, know where you're going. Ask for directions if you're uncertain. Plug the directions into a MapQuest or Google Maps. Something that's going to give you a sense of directions. Last thing you want to do is be late or calling and indicating you're not sure where to go. Important to know that right up front. And also make sure you check the date and times prior to the date of the hearing. Make sure you don't have a doctor's appointment. Make sure that you don't have, something important for kids at school or whatever it is. You want to make sure that you clear that date, that you know where you're going. And also you want to dress for success. This is a semi-formal event. It's a quasi-judicial hearing. So you'd want to wear what you wear to a business meeting. So the next steps really are kind of go over the facts that you know as you know them in your mind. Get a sense of what you want to say and try to recall exactly what occurred, but don't try to memorize things. And the reason that we suggest that is if you memorize it, we typically memorize things in a certain order, or we memorize it a certain way. And sometimes then when we're asked about that information and it's out of context or if it's out of order with the way that we memorized it, it can get us kind of jumbled. And that can hurt your credibility on the stand if you're stumbling trying to remember something. So it's better to remember the overall sort of facts and exactly what happened and the sort of the gist of what happened and just the facts. And that way, if you're asked about a fact, you can recall it simply. Whereas trying to memorize, presenting it a certain way may be a little bit more problematic for you. So what happens when you testify? And this is called direct examination. And so this is the first, typically after opening statements, this is sort of the first step. And it's going to be the person who called you as a witness that is going to be the person conducting the direct examination. And their questions are designed to sort of help you to present the facts. You're going to testify by responding to the requests and the questions that they're asked, oftentimes by the lawyer representing the side that called you, or the representative representing the side that called you, or the fair hearing officer. That's the direct testimony process. And the purpose is really just to kind of draw out the truth of the facts you know. So this is a just the facts situation, and the process itself is designed to get to the truth of that. There'll be questions about what you know. There always will be questions, well, not always, but there will sometimes be questions about things you don't know. If you don't know, say so. I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. Instead of trying to sort of make something up that fits with the facts, you're just testifying as to what you actually know. So after direct examination, there's cross-examination. And this is the time when the opposing party, their lawyer, their representatives, will have a turn to ask you questions that'll test the questions that you answered during the direct examination. And the purpose of those questions is to see if you adequately observe the facts. It'll also test your credibility a little bit. And the purpose is, by both parties, all the questions asked by both parties, is to bring out the truth about the facts you know. So, and this is where we get into some cautions about testifying just to the facts. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But remember that if you can testify to facts, that's a good place to be. Once you get into interpretation, it gets a little more dicey. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So a few things to keep in mind. Witnesses are often judged more by their appearance, their behavior, how they say things, as much as what they say. So if you can stay calm, if you can present the facts, if you're not presenting strong opinions, if you're going sort of just by the book and being really objective, you're going to be perceived as a more credible witness. Even if you don't believe you have the knowledge and experience to testify, whoever called you does. So important to know, sort of be confident in what you know, be confident in the facts that you know, but beware of putting your opinion out there. And we'll talk about why in just a few minutes. tell the truth. Stick to the facts. These are just some rules to keep in mind. Don't worry about helping or hurting another party with what you say. And as we said, don't express your opinion as to who should win or lose. Remember that testimony is about perspective. Remember we said getting to the truth? If you can picture one person standing on one side and the other person standing on the other side of a numeral carved into the ground, what looks for all the world like one person to be a 6 will look for all the world to another person to be a 9. So how would you really testify about that? The facts are that you were standing at whatever day and time and you saw something carved into the ground. Those are the facts. Anything else is your interpretation of it. If somebody asks your interpretation of it, you can answer, look to me a little bit like a 6. But the thing to avoid saying is, it was definitely a 6. There was no way it was anything else. It was never a 9, right? That's kind of going above and beyond. It's kind of interjecting your opinion as to who you think should win or lose. See the difference there? The objective facts is, on this day, on May 12th, 2017, I was in Anderson, South Carolina, and I looked down and I saw a numeral carved into the ground. And that's the facts. And then if somebody then follows that up with, what did you think that meant? You can answer that question, but only that. And you want to just answer that question as to what you think if they ask, and don't go beyond that, right? So again, the basic rule to think about is tell the truth, stick to the facts, and present just the facts. Don't worry about whether you're helping or hurting any party with what you have to say. Act seriously and respectfully. That's an important piece. Again, you're going to be perceived, your quality of your witness testimony is going to be perceived by, judged by your behavior. Be aware of your body language. You want to present very neutral body language. Know that a question might be designed to elicit a certain answer, kind of like a trap question if you think. Be confident in your answer anyway. If you're just testifying to the facts, then there's nothing really to be concerned about. So if somebody wants to bring out the fact that you were standing there on May 17th or May 12th, 2017, and staring down at that number, okay, then they bring that out. That. It's up to the representatives to present the facts in a way that helps or hurt their case. It wouldn't change one way or another, depending on who asked you, that you were standing there on May 12th, 2017, that you looked down on the ground and you saw something carved into the ground. That wouldn't change regardless of who asked you, and that's a simple fact. So it's okay to be confident in that. More rules to follow. Think carefully and listen through the question. So listen carefully and think through the question before you answer. You set the pace. Don't let folks rush you. If you need a second to answer the question, take it. The hearing officer will often, if somebody's trying to rush you and you're thoughtfully kind of composing an answer, the hearing officer will generally support you in doing that. Obviously, if you sit there for an extended period of time, somebody's going to ask you to give some information. But don't hesitate to take a moment, listen carefully to the question, take a moment to think about it, and then respond carefully and intentionally. Again, that presents you as a careful, thoughtful witness, and that's how you want to be perceived. Respond with your voice. Shakes of the head and gestures can't be recorded and don't make good testimony. Remember that the primary focus of a hearing officer is to maintain the integrity of the hearing and also maintain an accurate record. And oftentimes hearings are recorded for that reason. And gestures and shakes of the head and things that are nonverbal don't make it onto recordings very well. So in many cases, if you're kind of tempted to respond that way, sometimes people will gently nudge you to verbalize your answers. But if you can keep that in mind and verbalize each answer, that'll keep you a little bit ahead of the game. If you don't understand the question, ask for clarification. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not sure I understood the question, or could you repeat that? Or I didn't hear that appropriately, could you repeat that? I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. If you don't know, say so. The other thing that we alluded to a little bit earlier, answer only the question that was asked. Don't volunteer any more information. So again, kind of going back to our example, there's two folks are staring down at a numeral carved in the ground on May 12th, 2017. When somebody says, what happened on May 12th of 2017, you just stick to the facts. On May 12th, 2017, I was standing in Anderson, South Carolina. I looked down at the ground. There appeared to be something carved into the ground. That's it. That's the facts. Don't volunteer any more information. If somebody then asks a follow-up question about what you thought about that, you can respond. Generally, if somebody asks a follow-up question like that, take a moment, because you want to take a moment before answering any question to make sure there's no objection to the question before you answer it. If somebody then asks your interpretation, it appeared to me to be a 6. That's a factual statement. It's a little bit into your opinion, but it's a factual statement. You're not going beyond that. You're not giving any more information. You're simply answering, what was your interpretation when you looked down? Looked to me like a 6. Factual answer, doesn't volunteer any more information. Very objective, delivered very calm, very reasonably. It's going to put you in a better position as a witness. You can explain your answer if needed, but only if needed. Don't feel like you have to explain an answer. If you've presented the facts, let those facts speak for themselves. Let that stand. Don't exaggerate. That's an important thing. That's what trips people up a lot of times when they're testifying, because they're thinking to themselves, oh, I'm trying to help this person, or that didn't sound right. That didn't sound like it's going to help the person. So I need to make it a little bit more forceful. Don't worry about that. Stick to the facts. Let the representatives do the job of presenting the facts in a way that helps or hurts their case, the case. Speak in your own words. Very important that when we use somebody else's words, we didn't produce those words, right? So we don't know the full thought process behind them. It's very easy to get tripped up about that. So if you can speak in your own words, you'll never get tripped up if you're speaking in your own words, really. It's really hard to get tripped up because you have the thought process behind that. If somebody asks you a follow-up question, you're really speaking from your own frame of reference. And that's much easier to understand and explain than when you're speaking in somebody else's words from somebody else's frame of reference. So important to kind of use your own words as you speak. Speak clearly and at a conversational volume. Again, you don't want to let your voice raise in volume or pitch. You just want to present the information very calmly, very clearly, and in a conversational volume. If you make a mistake, correct it. You know what? I misspoke when I said this. What I really meant was that. Or I misspoke when I said May 12th. It may have been May 13th. I can't recall exactly, right? It's okay to be a little bit inexact. It's okay to correct any mistake that you've made. Remember, you're putting things on record, so you want to be as accurate as you can be. You want to be confident. You want to be consistent. If you said, yes, this happened on May 12th, 2017, and that's not inaccurate, you want to be consistent with that. You want to be confident in that. If you want to say, I looked down at the ground and there was something carved in it, you want to be confident with that. You want to be consistent with that. That's a fact as you know it. So recognize that what you're presenting is the facts as you know them. The facts as somebody else knows them. Again, that's that person on the other side of that numeral carved into the ground. They may have a completely different perspective on those facts. The facts are different as they know them, and that's okay too. That's their perspective. Try not to get involved in the back and forth. Simply present the facts as you know them. So another rule to keep in mind, don't speak in absolutes. Just state what you know. Going back to our example, if you're on one side of that number, instead of saying, no, it was definitely a 6. I looked down and it was a 6. Couldn't possibly be any other number. We don't necessarily know that. We know that it appeared to us to be a 6, right? So what we can state is it appeared to me to be a 6. We don't want to speak in the absolutes. Couldn't be another number. It was absolutely this, because we don't know. We don't have another person's perspective. So again, it's important that we stay calm, stick to the facts, report what we know. If you're interrupted by the hearing officer, stop immediately and wait for further instruction. Typically, if they interrupt witness testimony, there's a reason. It's either procedural or it's to kind of interrupt what could be testimony that's not quite appropriate. Could be a lot of reasons that a hearing officer interrupts. And if that happens, best practice is just to stay quiet and listen for further instruction. Try not to talk over a hearing officer or the person posing the question. Again, one of the most important things that a hearing officer has to do is maintain an accurate record. And that's really difficult to do when people are talking over one another. Oftentimes, in fact, hearing officers will instruct you to that when you first get there. People talking over one another really interferes with a clean recording. And so it's a good thing to keep in mind if that's not something that you know already. Respond only to questions. Don't respond to statements. So if somebody makes a statement, is it true that you were in Anderson, South Carolina, March 12th, 2017? Yes. So you saw a 6. That's not a question. Don't respond. Oftentimes, statements like that are used by representatives to sort of bait someone into a statement. Only respond to questions. And it's okay to say, if you don't understand whether something is a statement or a question, could you restate the question? Oftentimes, if somebody makes a statement like that, you'll hear an objection on one side or another. Again, always a good practice to pause. But if you do pause, you don't hear anything, it's okay to say, can you repeat that? Or could you repeat the question? And just respond to the question. Remain calm. Don't lose your temper. This isn't personal. Nobody's got anything specifically against you personally. This is just a process, and the process is to get to the truth of things. Sometimes emotions get heightened in situations like this, but the best thing you can do is just remain calm. You're going to be a better witness if you're calm and don't lose your temper. Along the same lines, don't become defensive or argumentative. That's one of the best ways to lose credibility as a witness, is to become defensive or argumentative. It's a great way to look like you're trying to present something one way or another and to lose credibility. If you lose your self-control, you're going to be much easier to trip up on cross-examination. So keep in mind that when you're testifying, when you're doing your direct testimony, and when you're on and even when you're in cross-examination, it's important to just kind of know that it's not about you. You kind of keep it calm, keep it to the facts, and keep your presentation very neutral. It's going to be your best chance of presenting as a witness in the best possible way. So there you have it, some quick tips for independent hearing witnesses. We hope that that's helpful for you as you prepare for the independent hearing in which you're going to testify. Thank you so much. Good luck with your testimony. We hope that it goes well for you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.